Hey, is this thing on? Are we recording? Can I get a tech person? Oh, for the love of ed tech.
Today, we're talking to Dr. Kim Gibbon, the Strategic Plan and Innovation Coordinator for Indian Hill Schools. Kim, welcome. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here.
So we always start by asking our guests to tell us a little bit about their journey into education and how you kind of ended up doing what you're doing, where you're doing it.
Sure. So I was not the typical kid who knew they wanted to be a teacher. I went to college undecided, and then my roommate decided to go into elementary education. So I'm like, oh, that looks like fun. I'll do that.
That sounds good.
And so just like from that happenstance weird beginning, I accidentally found my calling. I absolutely 100% loved it. So I've been teaching for 35 years. And in that time, I've taught second grade, I've taught third grade. I've worked with students specifically on technology. I have been a technology integration specialist. So I've helped teachers to use technology in their classrooms. And then I decided, oh, I learned a lot of stuff. I need to go back in the classroom. So my next era, I'm Taylor Swift, right?
Yes.
My next
Yes.
era was about 17 years of working as a gifted intervention specialist in a gifted pull-out program in the middle school. And that was a project-based learning class. And I used everything that I had learned in educational technology in that class. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, about some of the pain points. Maybe people can learn from some of the mistakes that I made in using educational tech.
Yeah.
And then after that, there's this thing called COVID that happened. And we were trying to make wise and safe decisions for students. And we had some students that were going to learn from home and some students that were going to come to school.
Right.
And we were trying to figure out how to limit movement of kids so we weren't, inadvertently having more opportunity for kids to get sick. So we shut down a lot of our special programming, which included the gifted programming for that year. And we pulled those people and put them into other roles. So some of our fabulous innovation coaching people came from the gifted world, and they did that during COVID and are still doing that work and doing great, great things with professional learning in our district. But my role was to run our online K through 12 gifted school, which was about 20% of our population. And again, I always pair the thinking of educational technology with early adopters and failing forward. And I mean, in that role, I felt I had permission to experiment in order to bring hope and joy to people, to try and think about what does learning look like at home in kindergarten as well as high school? What does that look like? So we spent a year of that, kind of hoped to expand that and continue building an online school, but our district is so small, it really was not feasible for us to be able to support teachers in leading those classes. And what we did learn was putting kids online was not the answer. We needed live people to run classes online in order for it to work well. So from there, this is what happened when you ask an old person what their journey has been. It's long.
No, we like this. This is exactly what we want. Yes.
From there, we decided in the midst of all that mess to start a strategic plan. And our superintendent, Kurt Konecki, was super visionary and realized that it doesn't matter what's happening at the moment. We need to give people hope and something to work towards and to be innovative. And so out of that, we started our strategic plan process, which is the first time that I've ever been a part of a strategic plan that impacted classroom practice. So my role currently is to kind of help connect the dots. I work in professional learning. I work with principals and teacher leaders to plan how can we make sure that we are preparing our students for tomorrow. And we've got great teaching and learning that happens right now, but what are the additional practices that we have not yet systematized K through 12 to really, really leverage the learning that kids are doing? And educational technology has a big part of that. So that's what I'm doing now. That's a bit of my journey over the last 35 years.
I'm curious too, when in that journey did you decide to get your PhD?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's super interesting in that a friend of mine talked me into going to UC. Again, I just let these friends decide what my future path is going to be.
They're just
it's
placed
working
in your
out.
life.
I mean, it seems okay.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine convinced me to apply to UC in, I think, 2016 to start a doctoral program. And I've been wanting to kind of do some advanced learning work. And at that point was teaching the gifted pull-out program, but also doing a lot of professional learning planning in the district. I run our mentoring program as we have new teachers come in. So she and I started together, and we thought, okay, this is a good way for us to kind of, we're ready for something new, for something different. And then maybe 6 months later, she met her future husband and decided that her lifelong project was going to be to start a family. So she did not stay in the program because she had bigger fish to fry, of course.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just going to be a box to check. I found that I really enjoyed the learning process in that format. And it totally changed how I looked at working with gifted learners. Like the way that we're focusing right now on student agency and having kids have choice in their learning. I was not a model student in K through 12 education. I think my parents were a little worried about me there for a while in high school. But I firsthand experienced what it feels like when you have autonomy and direction and choice intrinsically located in your learning. And then it reminded me why some of our gifted learners are sometimes also our behavioral friends, or like they're underachieving a little bit. So it really kind of helped me understand from a new perspective. So that is when I got my doctorate. Yeah.
That's really cool though.
Yeah.
You had you started with kind of like an accountability buddy.
Yes. Part of it was just to get me to finish. I am a great beginner of things. I am not always a great finisher of things. So finishing that doctorate it took 6 years. It took a while.
Nothing wrong with that.
It's hard. And when you're somebody that I feel like needs structure and deadlines, and you are not used to imposing your own structure and deadlines, I think that can be really challenging.
How do you define the true value of educational technology in the classroom, and what factors should educators consider when evaluating its effectiveness?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I'm going to start off by admitting that when I was in the classroom with students, they may have suffered something that I call techno-schizophrenia, because every new tool that I found, I was really excited about, and we tried them all.
I think we've all done that.
We would sometimes have like the same tool that was accomplished the same thing, or different tools that would accomplish the same thing, and I was making them try them all.
Gotcha.
We're just beta testing everything. That's
right. So like, don't recommend that. So what I have learned, especially, I think what's good for gifted students is good for all students. But what I learned in working with gifted students was that if your technology you're using is not leveraging learning for all students, if it's not breaking down barriers between your little isolated classroom and the rest of the world, if it's not connecting you authentically to real learning, if it's not increasing the depth and complexity of the learning, it's not worth using. So it's really important that technology be able to be an equalizer, allow all kids to access curriculum at a deep level, as well as an expander. Like, how can technology help students to further what's possible, how they think about themselves, and further what's possible for them in their pathway long term. And I just am a big fan of all the ISTE work and the work that they're doing to try and help educators understand this. I just feel like sometimes we think about technology as something we just have to do. And while I don't think it's optional, I think everybody needs to do it. It is important that we use it in a way that really is a liberator for learners.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and two, it needs to add something. It needs to add that value to it. Otherwise, it is kind of like, what's the point?
Yeah. Just one more thing. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are so many valuable ways to use it. But what do you think are some common misconceptions that educators may encounter when integrating technology into their teaching practices? And I think some of that goes toward that of ooh, this looks cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Many ways to do it incorrectly. For me, that's how it's been. I would say that one assumption that I'm thinking a lot about, when I was working as a professional developer of educators in using ed tech, it was in the late 90s, in the early 2000s. It was a long time ago. And yet the tenets are the same. So we assumed that there would be this magical point in time when teachers would come out of their teacher preparation courses ready to use technology appropriately with students. And that is not the case, because personal use of technology is not the same as educational and pedagogical use of technology.
Right.
So that's one assumption that I was really for kind of coaches and administrators to be thinking about, is that you have to actively support educators in learning how to use technology well in the classroom. I think another assumption is that there's two sides to it. One is that it has to be hard and a lot of work to integrate technology well. I don't think that that's true, especially if you're discerning in which technologies you're integrating. And that another assumption is that it's optional. I don't believe it's optional. I think in today's day and age, everybody needs to be using technology, both to differentiate for every single learner and also to connect learners outside of the classroom.
Also, do you think that as educators, we make assumptions that students know more about technology than they actually do when it comes to either the use of, or maybe even like troubleshooting or problem solving?
Yeah, I think that's so true. It reminds me of when I was taught to teach math with little ones, and that when we would use manipulatives in the math class, if you were smart, you had a whole time for kids to explore before you
Right.
expected them to use them as tools. And I think the same is true of technology. You have to give kids a chance to explore before you're using tools. And you need to celebrate and support students who do natively love it and master it, to be supporters of other kids. Like, allow that troubleshooting to happen. But you can't assume that kids are going to use it well, appropriately. And if you're adding that layer of complexity onto an assignment, and the thinking and the work is also complex, it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
You need like one layer of hard in whatever it is that you're doing with kids. Either the technology is new, or the learning is super deep, or the output or product is something that pushes kids in a different way. And like, you can integrate that into a project, but not in one lesson, in my opinion.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. Cause I'm always curious about, people that will make comments of young adults like coming into, the job place, and how they assume that they're great using technologies. And yet really they're learning that those skills aren't necessarily intuitive, because what they're using technology for on a personal level is, pretty simplistic in a sense.
Right.
It's a lot of like tapping or swiping or what, it's not
Yeah.
like deeper, I guess, skills. If you like this podcast, check out our latest, Minds Over Media, a collaboration between SOIDA and the University of Cincinnati, delving into diverse aspects of media literacy. Uncover the power of media literacy through insightful conversations, and gain valuable insight from esteemed scholars and dedicated educators navigating this complex landscape. Check it out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Teachers, you can now earn contact hours toward grad credit for listening to the podcast.
Visit fortheloveofedtech.org for more information.
How can educators ensure that the educational technologies they choose align with their instructional goals and pedagogical approaches?
That's really great question. And I think when I think back to my own practice, this may be a step I skipped. As I was just like, ooh, that looks like fun. I want to do that. So, as is implied in the question, you have to really think about what's your pedagogy, what's your content you're trying to teach. Does the technology not just like align, like, I need a fun way for kids to review something?
Mm-hmm.
What does it
Yeah.
allow kids to do differently because you're using the technology? Is it because it allows for you to better personalize the learning experience? Does it allow for kids to have the kind of differentiation that they need? Does it connect kids with new opportunities to think about the content differently? If it doesn't do those things, it may not be worth it. There's a lot to be said about wanting to do something fun in the classroom to engage learners, I'm thinking about this week, we're doing testing. And so I know that what teachers are doing when kids are finished testing is not introducing new content. What they are doing is helping kids to engage with one another in fun ways.
Yeah.
But when you're spending more time planning to use the technology than the impact is giving you, it may not be worth it. An example I can think of is there's been a lot of excitement around tools that allow for kids to easily review and gamify getting ready for assessment. Things like Kahoot, things like, oh, I can't remember. There's a Gym
Quizzes.
Kit,
Oh, Gimkit.
quizzes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
GameKit.
And those definitely have their place. And what I love about them is once a teacher makes them, they're accessible to the kids whenever they need them. So that's a real strength. But a
Mhm.
limitation is if that's the only way kids learn how to review or be able to demonstrate their learning, it's pretty simplistic. It's not getting at the deeper critical thinking that we really want for kids to have. And so it may not be the only tool that a teacher would employ. And it's not worth like converting your whole curriculum to be tested with, quizzes or whatever.
I feel like too, oftentimes technology, if it's utilized properly, has the chance to reach those different kinds of learning needs,
Yeah.
for specific learners. So, yeah, just keeping it in the pedagogy of things. But that's a sidebar. Anyway, what strategies do you recommend for effectively assessing the impact of educational technology on student engagement and achievement? Now, I'm really curious about this one.
Well, again, when I was in the classroom, I did not do a great job of this. I mean, there would
Mhm.
be informal feedback, as you always get
Yeah.
from middle schoolers. "Ooh, that was really fun," or "Don't do that again."
Yeah.
So honest. Love it.
They are. But I think the first step is be intentional and gather assessing the impact. And
Mhm.
not just assessing, like I think there's an element of student feedback that needs to happen. And students need to be, a part of the discussion about the way in which classes are taught. But additionally, what is the student performance on authentic assessment? Do you find that it's better because you've used the technology, or is it more limited? What is the time that you invested in using the technology? And what was the progress of the learner in using the technology? So I would say an example of a good situation is that if you are incorporating technology as a part of maybe a problem-based learning unit, that's going to take a different amount of time, class time, than direct instruction.
Yeah.
Right.
However, it's also likely going to ensure that students take more away from the learning and engage their brain differently than direct instruction. So time is not the single indicator. It is a piece of the, calculation you need to do as an educator about whether using the technology is worth the time. If it engages students more deeply with the content or skill, and the outcome then should be that they are able to perform at a higher level, demonstrating that they have learned more than without the technology, then the technology is worth the time and effort.
I don't know if it's like a time thing when you're in the classroom and you are just, I don't know. I feel like I was always looking for different ways to try things,
Yeah.
or like you just kind of intuitively know your students and you're like, "Ugh, I don't think that worked well for them."
Right.
So
Mhm.
then you're like, how can I shift?
Mm-hmm.
But keeping track of that or tracking that for learning outcomes isn't always necessarily um,
Top of mind.
yeah.
Right. Because you got to plan for the next day. I mean, stuff moves on. So I do think that one of the greatest gifts I had as an educator was teaching a class that was a semester class. So my cycles of iteration were tighter than in a typical year-long class. That
Mhm.
allowed me to have like less groundhog effect of where I was repeating the same things and not getting the results that I wanted because I had forgotten before. But if you can add to your practice that there's a systemic way that you're capturing the strengths and limitations of the technology you're using, it's going to just really empower your planning in the future. It is worth, whatever strategy works for people, just taking a quick note, however you want to capture that, it
Yeah.
will help with planning. It is a facet of the planning process, in my opinion.
That's for sure. And I think too, when you try technologies and they don't work on,
Yeah.
then you're immediately okay, was this really worth my time? Seeing that it didn't work like I thought it was going to, kind of a thing too.
Yeah.
Well, and also to like, yes, and like if you
Mhm.
have a coach or a partner that you can work with, it might be that it needs to be tried differently, or that, either the kids need more training first, or that you as an educator need to think about it differently. So there's certainly lots of things that were ed tech related that I gave up on, but I think, and that's okay. That's like a good choice as
Yeah.
long as you're not missing out on something that could work with a little bit of tweaking. So it's kind of that
Yeah.
design
Right.
thinking mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so how do you think that current educational technology trends will shape the future of teaching and learning? Yeah, we know a big trend right now is the AI, the the immersion of AI, I guess, in our face.
Yeah.
So even though
Yes.
it's existed and been around for a long time.
Right.
Long time.
Suddenly
Yeah.
it seems to be a thing.
Yes.
That along with phone use bans. So I have a few
Oh.
thoughts.
Yes.
First of all, I tend to be a little Pollyanna, a little optimistic about things. When I first started getting super excited about the possibility of using technology in the classroom with students, it was at the dawn of like internet use in schools. I mean, again, experienced, been around a long time, right? So the same arguments and fears were in place of how is this going to change teaching and learning, and does it need to change teaching and learning, and are our kids suddenly going to become lazy because they have access to all these things at their fingertips instead of going to the library and using microfiche. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and honestly, it was the same argument when calculators came out.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
that's the end
For
of
sure.
anybody thinking about being a good mathematician because there's a calculator. And
Yep.
what I have learned in that cycle is that if you can approach these tools with critical thought
Mhm.
and include kids in the work, you're going to do better. Banning them is not a solution because kids will get access to
Right.
them outside of school or sometimes inside of
Yep.
school, depending on how good their firewall workaround strategies are. But we can't really expect kids to make good choices with technologies if we're not teaching them to use the tools properly. And again, the ISTE standards that's at the heart of that work. I just really think, because I'm optimistic about the ways in which we can shift as an educational, I don't know, organization, institution,
Yeah.
if we
Mhm.
embrace with caution the ways in which AI should change the way we teach and learn. So like
Mhm.
there's a revolution on the horizon that we need to think about how we teach writing differently. Um, in order for kids to both utilize the power of that tool and as it continues to evolve, and still learn how to put together a logical argument that is defensible and based on real facts and all the rest.
Look at things as a friend instead of a foe. How can we get along with this friend?
Yes. And honestly, we can
You
use the
know?
friend collaboration work too.
Yeah. Well, we're glad that you were willing to talk to us.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to our For the Love of EdTech podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation today and learned something that you can use with your own students. You can find the show notes, resources, and more at www.fortheloveofedtech.org.
For Love of EdTech is produced by SOIDA, the Southwestern Ohio Instructional Technology Association, in partnership with Think TV and CET, the local PBS stations in Dayton and Cincinnati.